If we're going to get to Mars, we're going to have to clear the maps. The dragons, cyclops, and other monsters of the mind must be killed, and the siren exposed for the fraud she is.
The Interplanetary Podcast. The exploration of space for the benefit of all humankind. Your hosts in England, Rob, Annable, and Matt Russell.
Oh yeah,
Robert Zubrin. He's the Zubermeister.
Bobby Z.
There was another Midlands accent that you just heard there. I'm joined on the podcast by Rob,
Hello.
one of the Spodcats, as promised last week.
Hello, Matt.
Well, obviously, Rob, you're an old hand at this now. You've done a couple.
Well, I don't know about that.
Tell us a little bit about yourself, and then that will sort of tie in with what the episode's all about.
Sure. Okay, so my name's Rob Annable. I'm an architect based in the UK and practice in the Midlands. I run an architecture practice that specialises in housing mostly, and I also teach at the Birmingham School of Architecture. And I just have a personal interest in interplanetary topics. Child of the shuttle era, so that's partly to blame. You have to be a bit of a nerd to be an architect. So it's a natural fit in terms of an interest in science technology. But also, I suppose that some of the discussions and details around interplanetary habitation and the science technology involved with it is sort of an extreme version of the very topics that you discussed in terrestrial architecture about sort of closed systems of energy, material science, and sort of an extreme discussion around what it is to dwell and to be in habitation and think about the environment. So that plus becoming a listener to this podcast over the last couple of years provided inspiration to get more involved and do some reading and research.
Well, I mean, you are the perfect co-host for this. This is all about space habitats. And I know that, for example, the Fred Sharman interview that we had a couple of years ago, that came via Rob, via the Discord.
Fred's a sort of long time internet friend and fellow architect with similar generations. So it's a pleasure to be able to introduce him to the podcast. And he continues to be sort of one of the most interesting thinkers and writers in this field from my profession's point of view. And a big influence, I think, certainly on me.
I love the book that you recommended, Fred's book, but I also really liked his little piece that's in the Design Museum Trip to Mars book, which is one of my favourite books. I'm so often when I go to exhibitions, I and ah about buying the expensive book at the end, and I and ah'd about that one. Thank goodness I bought it.
Fantastic publication, and some of the things that Fred raises in that essay that he wrote, and we'll touch on some of his work later on as well. I think some of the things he raises are sort of one of the key interests and things that I've been trying to grapple with over the last couple of years around how often the space architecture community does or doesn't engage with architectural history. And what I've found when looking at papers and research over the last couple of years, I've often been surprised at how often people involved in this field seem to always just default to the complete sort of fresh start tabula rasa when it comes to talking about habitation and design, and don't seem to lean on the history of terrestrial architecture very much. So what you'll have seen in that Fred Sharman article in the Mars Design, the Mars exhibition booklet, is him using his experience in architectural history and theory, and using that as a framework to critique and think about interplanetary habitation. So we have sort of similar interests in that respect. It's impossible for us to look at this stuff and not think about architectural history here on Earth and how it applies.
Well, why do you think that is? Why do you think that people are reticent to think about that, or why do you think they've forgotten it? Is it because it's dominated by engineers? Possibly.
There's a long history of that, and in certain texts and books, you'll see that there's been brief occasions where somebody from the design field with a capital D, or architecture, industrial design, has been involved. It tends to be sort of engineering led, I guess. But I think, as we touched on in the interview later, there's perhaps sometimes a lack of thinking about the sort of the metaphysics of it, in a sense, about what it is to exist in these spaces, beyond just the raw facts about what it takes to survive, to subsist in that environment. I might be doing huge swathes of the sector a disservice there, by saying that, but certainly in the last couple of years of reading, it's been a thought that's often come to my mind about how often things could be improved on by referring to existing architectural history.
Let's dive straight in. We've covered how humans get to Mars last week, and this is how you would actually stay on Mars really this week. How you actually build habitats that grow, and because all the things that we've talked about, like von Braun and Zubrin's Mars Direct, are landing in a spaceship, living in a spaceship. They're not starting to build a city, but that's what we're kind of talking about here, isn't it, really?
Yeah, it is. And the Mars Society this year has progressed onto that, and we'll come on to that recent competition. And that's brought extra challenges to the table, I think, talking about city-scale thinking. But in some respects, the sort of Mars Direct body of work, which is an incredible piece of work that was hugely influential for many years, and it's still sort of the touchstone, I think, for many people when it comes to thinking about Mars missions. A lot of the discussion and reading around that topic often seems to focus again on just the hard maths of getting there. How many launches, how many kilograms do you need to get there and back? How many trips does that take? How do you land it? And then really seem to touch on the more complex cultural and social stuff.
Yeah, that is odd, isn't it? And because let's face it, you can't do it without that. It's
not at scale. Not at scale.
Well, it doesn't make any sense almost to even think about it without having this as the long-term goal. So what I want to do is first define the problem, because I know a lot of our listeners know what the problem is with Mars, but the problem really is the same as the moon, isn't it? You've got the need for radiation protection. That's huge. I don't think we realise just how lucky we are on the Earth, having a big fat atmosphere soaking it all up. But radiation protection is definitely something that's probably worse than people think it is, because we've been stuck in low Earth orbit for so long, and that's protected by the Van Allen belts. That's not even out there in the proper hardcore space. Then you've got the lack of gravity, and that's a complete unknown. I mean, that for me is it's incredible how we just don't know whether even a small amount of gravity solves the problem.
It's interesting to describe it as a challenge, though, because architecturally speaking, there might be some benefits to it from the loads on the structure and what you can achieve. I don't know that I've seen many examples of people experimenting with high-rise ideas for interplanetary habitation, but structural opportunities, because there's greater ability for the structure to respond to less load through it because of that reduced gravity. Something that might be a benefit as well.
But I guess you're not building with such pristine materials, are you?
I guess in most of the cases you see that, of course, ISRU and the use of existing material is a key part of that. So the manufacturing process might be flawed, perhaps. The 3D printing developments that are going on now and the level of control required over those materials actually could precisely deliver that. And a lot of 3D printing work and research on Earth examines how the precision in 3D printing can deliver a really efficient structure, explicitly go for maximum efficiency and reduction in material quantity. So those two things combined, less gravity and absolute precision in structural design, could be a benefit maybe.
Yeah, additive manufacturing, yeah, it's incredible. We've got poisonous regolith. I think the perchlorates in the regolith. Again, there's a plus side to that, in that perchlorates are obviously quite useful for things like explosives and solid rocket propellants and things.
Yeah.
Not great. You've got extreme cold, like all the time.
Yeah.
That's not good. And of course, what do you do about your energy? The sunlight that you get out at Mars is nothing like the sunlight that you get on Earth. Although there's less atmosphere, but still.
But dust storms.
Dust storms is a problem. Yeah, dust storms is a problem. But you don't get really cloudy days. So
yeah, true. True.
You get maybe a couple of years of sunshine every day.
Yeah.
Where you say sunshine, but obviously not exactly ideal. So we talked about the 3D printed habitat challenge on podcast 147. We kind of went into that in depth, but I thought it was worth covering again because I think the main part of this episode is going to be about the recent Mars Society entries. But this one was a very major kind of program, wasn't it? The 3D printed habitat challenge by NASA was one of their centennial challenges, and it was to build 3D printed habitats for deep space exploration. And of course, that did kind of center on Mars and the moon.
Yeah, and an interesting structure to the competition as well, with its over several phases, focusing on different qualities, which I thought was very interesting because it resulted in a 3-stage PR exercise in which communication about these outcomes covered different topics and different outcomes.
Yeah, and they put their money where their mouth was. They put $3.15 million into it. So this, it's a nice little competition. Obviously, no one's expecting that they're going to actually build these things, but it's a good competition to be involved in. And the phase 1 was I remember this being like an amazing breakthrough idea, the ice house.
Yeah, beautiful. Really interesting project.
Yeah, because you've got this building where you make it out of ice. I guess it's a bit like the Inuits and the igloo, isn't it? Yeah. It seems like an improbable structure, but actually it's just about the cleverest structure you can have in that environment.
Yeah, it's a really interesting project, this. I mean, first of all, it looked beautiful. Yeah. The internal space is position on the landscape, and the way it reflected the light in the renders looked absolutely fantastic. I thought it was really interesting because it tackled that question of regolith challenges, poisonous regolith, by simply avoiding it mostly. So a lot of projects in the past have relied on the use of regolith either through compression and brick arches or rammed regolith, and also reusing it for 3D printing. But this one just sort of dispensed with that and focused on ice instead, which was really interesting. It integrated the whole system into the lander itself. So when you look at the diagrams for that, it's got a really smart, efficient looking process where the initial structure unfolds from the lander itself, and that becomes the core of the house. But one of my interest in it was really to touch on what I talked about at the start, about this idea that sort of interplanetary design and thinking really exposes architectural thinking in its most extreme sense, is that project succeeds through recognizing that the layers and the thresholds from outside to in, from the Martian atmosphere to the space inside, have to be so tightly controlled. In terrestrial architecture, that's actually a device that we talk about and think about a lot, that the threshold, the boundary between you and the space you were before, that difference is how we express quality and experience in good architecture. So as a device, understanding the threshold is quite an important part of my profession. It's something I talk about a lot with my students. And what you have in that ice house competition is it's all about the threshold. It takes the airlock, that really extreme threshold, and expands it around the building in a sense, because it has these 2 layers that you move through, where you've clearly moved from one environment into another that's slightly moderated and changed again before you finally arrive in the central location, protected away from that Martian environment. So yeah, a good example of how architectural thinking around thresholds becomes a critical part of that system.
Yeah, it almost reminded me of somehow being a little tiny man sort of walking through double glazing.
Yeah, that's precisely what it is. It's just a very large double glazing system.
Yeah, but I love the way that the sort of robot inside crawled around spraying water, and it's that understanding, isn't it, that the lack of atmospheric pressure and the temperature means that water just instantly turns into ice. There's no waiting for it, so you can spray ice onto walls. So it would seem that it's probably quite a feasible technology to build with.
And it certainly seems like in the examples they've shown, they did one-to-one experiments doing that, and that seemed pretty impressive and convincing. So it clearly has some merit. And the common theme, of course, in a lot of these projects is a level of automation, and that's the technology in terms of control and precision that over the last, probably 10, 15 years has really started to change this paradigm, in a sense, that reliance on automation. And you'll see it through other entries in these phases coming up as well, be it through 3D printing or some sort of landscape adjustments through mini rovers, in a sense.
Yeah. Well, Jeff Bezos is going to have quite a lead there, isn't he? Because the automated Amazon warehouses. I mean, that must be a stack of data right there.
Absolutely,
that's pretty useful for doing stuff like this.
Yeah, it seems key. And the second phase winner, the Foster and Partners submission, relied on that in a very different way to prepare the ground. Some of the materials and processes for the actual habitation were more straightforward, but the use of mini sojourners returning to that scale of rover, which I think is interesting as well in the current climate of demonstrating our abilities to deliver 1.5 ton rovers or whatever it is that Perseverance is right now. A lot of these technologies actually return to greater numbers, a sort of swarm of automation to develop these ideas. And the Foster and Partners one for phase 2 did that by preparing the ground.
So what are these little tiny sojourners go round? Is it called sintering, where you kind of
there was sintering going on there, heating it up to bake it and make it solid. And this is all, of course, connected to the discussions, I think, about how you manage dust when landing. If you can form a landing pad in advance, that's a key part of it. But the Foster and Partners scheme also used that sort of swarm of small rovers to dig, prepare, and then build the regolith walls around their scheme as well.
It's incredible, isn't it? Going back to that, the very first von Braun trip to Mars, and he's thinking about things like building runways and getting the ground prepared, and it's still a thing. It's still there, isn't it? Which makes you realise just how visionary von Braun was.
I think it's actually going to continue to be absolutely critical. Just yesterday, actually, I saw a really interesting NASA study on landing pads that didn't just look to change the condition of the ground and sinter it, but we're experimenting with 3D printing to change the patterns on the landing pad itself to then deflect the energy from the rocket in different ways to control the dust cloud like that. So you were sort of drawing a landing pad, but not just a circle, but it had patterns in it in order to control the flow of dust, which I thought was a really interesting move as well.
Well, presumably it's to control the flow of acoustics as well, because rocket engine noise bouncing up at your vehicle probably isn't the best.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we tied to that too. But it's an intervention on the landscape. So we're making marks on the landscape in interesting and artistic ways as well in doing that. If you look at that NASA study, we'll have to put it in the notes, but that particular NASA study, it was a beautiful pattern on the landing pad that was going to control the
Does it look like crop circles? Does it give any kudos to crop circles?
It absolutely did, actually. I think you might be onto something there. That's the reason. It was crop dust they were trying to reduce.
How incredible. And then phase 3 was the actual kind of building up of 3D habitats, wasn't it? Actually printing these large constructions.
Yeah, so it's the Martian scheme by AI Space Factory. That really caught the most attention, I think, from a communications point of view, when you could witness the 3D printing competition take place. But some interesting stuff in here. I was just going to say around the design of it itself, not just in terms of technology, but its form and scale as well. Around the question of the traditional low-lying dome or the taller structure that stands upright.
Which one do you prefer? The going up or the going across?
Well, the going up move has some really interesting outcomes. And one of them relates back to that Fred Sharman piece that you mentioned at the start about how this work should try to communicate something beyond the technology. And on the website for the Martian Project, you'll see them describe the taller structure as a beacon on the landscape, as opposed to just something that is sort of apologetically trying to sort of snuggle down into the landscape. And I thought just the use of that phrase alone was interesting. That it's something that suggests a more optimistic vision of the future. This is a freestanding, taller structure that stands on its own right. Some interesting sort of outcomes from that around wayfinding, maybe. This is a more visible structure. So back to dust storms again. Maybe you can find your way home more easily on a tall structure. But spatially, there's some interesting moves there around efficiencies, both in the technology to make it in the 3D printing, but also the way you move around it through a vertical space, and circulation efficiencies as well. Rather than wasting a lot of time and energy moving horizontally, you can perhaps move vertically, certainly on plan, take up less space to just move vertically through a space. But you have to acknowledge again that in 2/3 gravity, moving up and down stairs is certainly less work on the knees and back than it is at home.
Well, you must get your exercise in.
Yeah.
Let's face it, people travel around the world to see tall buildings, don't they? People go around the world to see the Burj Khalifa because it's the tallest building, and or the Empire State Building, and it's because it's tall. They don't go and see. Well, I know some people do, and I love things like bunkers or stuff like that. Yeah. But but on the whole, people are drawn to those kind of buildings, aren't they?
They are. I mean, there's usually some discussion about the fact that most towers are designed by men.
Mm-hmm.
But,
and rockets.
Well, yeah. It's the same criticism, and it's probably quite fair.
Yeah. So the Marsh is quite interesting, isn't it? Because they actually built one, didn't they? Called Terror, that you could actually stop in.
Yeah, has that been complete yet? I know that was the plan.
I think COVID put an end to it. I think they were just about to start, and unfortunately, the COVID came along, and that's it.
Yeah.
So I went to their Kickstarter Indiegogo website to see what was going on, right. And they are planning to restart once they can.
Right.
But I mean, it looks amazing. I was so close to paying for an Indiegogo stay in Terror.
How much was it?
It wasn't that much. It was something like, I don't know, $500 for a 2-night stay or something.
Okay, doable.
That it's doable, isn't it? I mean,
save up long enough. That's doable, maybe.
Yeah, for us Midlanders.
Yeah. So really interesting project, and one of the other things to just tie back to where we started the discussion about the impact of designers on the sector is that we've noted here that it has a couple of windows, much like the ISS. And the story that came to mind when thinking about that was the history of the arguments about whether or not it's necessary to have windows.
Incredible.
I think the history there is related to Skylab. And after the input of Raymond Lowe, the industrial designer, brought in to try and improve Skylab, who I believe was constantly sort of up against discussions with the engineering department, the technical challenges versus the qualitative value. One of the arguments they had around Skylab was whether or not it should have a window. Of course, it's an extra technical challenge to put a window into Skylab, and there was resistance from the engineer. Raymond Lowe won out, and they agreed to put the window in. And I've seen it suggested, I think quite rightly, it's the history and value of that, and the recognition of the value on the mental health of the astronauts, and the communication about how you demonstrate the experience that possibly became the reason that the ISS had a cupola in it and became such a critical part of sort of science communication. I mean, when you see a photograph in the ISS of an astronaut, they're in that cupola looking down on Earth, aren't they?
Well, the amount of pictures that each of the astronauts takes themselves of their hometown, and some of the pictures that Tim Peake took of Britain as he's sort of going over. Well, his general photography was amazing, and they all seem to be brilliant photographers. But they get I mean, it would be ludicrous without that space. It would just be
and there nearly
insane.
wasn't. There nearly wasn't a window.
There nearly wasn't, because the Americans didn't have designers, did they, as part of their sort of people designing spaceships, whereas the Russians did.
Yeah, they did actually. They had an architect, Galina Balashova.
And I highly recommend that book.
Yeah, I mean, her work is incredible. The work she did on the Mir station, the design for the interior of those spaces in the Russian program was incredible. It thought about orientation, it thought about color schemes and well-being, it thought about views and the use of the space in a completely different way to the way the engineers would have done on the Apollo mission. And I can't help but wonder, had the space race played out in a different way, whether or not our attitudes to industrial design, science fiction references, and spaceship design might have played out very differently had the world seen Galina Balashova's interiors, including paintings that she would paint for the cosmonauts to put on the walls that would tragically burn up on re-entry, of course. Watercolors that she'd paint herself to put on the walls. Had the world seen that front and center, had the Russians won the space race and landed on the moon, I wonder about its impacts on the history of design.
I always think to Alien, the film, when it came out, there's many aspects to Alien, the film, when it came out that was just mind-blowingly good. But one of them was the fact that it was the first time. We were so used to Star Trek and all those kind of things having pristine white interiors. Even 2001 is guilty of it.
Yeah.
Whereas Alien, it was a ship, a working environment that looked like a factory, looked like a looked like a place of work, of hard work. Not not someone in an office in their thinking area with a bowl of cornflakes.
Part of the military industrial complex, as opposed to just corporate America. Yeah, I
guess society at the time shapes what things look like. You can tell a Russian rocket; it just looks Russian. It's just odd, isn't it? That design somehow makes itself manifest in things that seem to be just practical on the surface. But yeah. Which is the interesting thing, isn't it, about these habitats? And I have to say, I do think Marsha looks great as a habitat.
It does, and really communicates the value of thinking carefully about every single aspect of that design beyond just the engineering. The interiors are stunning. It looks like an environment that you would happily dwell in. My inner reservation about all that body of work that I think I shared on the Discord at the time with the rest of the Spodcats, which sort of leads into what we might talk about in the Mars Society competition, is my inner reservation with that work is that it continues to focus on this sort of a remake of the single dwelling. It's almost a version of the suburban family home dotted across the landscape. And whilst I can enthuse about the quality of the spaces themselves and the material science and the rigor that goes into them, to see them standing alone in that extreme environment with 300 yards of no atmosphere between you and your neighbour is actually slightly terrifying at the same time.
Oh God, yeah. I mean, it's very similar. When I see things like that, it reminds me of Frontier America, the sort of thing you see Clint Eastwood farming in a little house with his ill wife in some bleak spaghetti western somewhere.
Absolutely. So that's sort of the individualism that rests within that single dwelling, be it for two people or a family of four, it still remains quite bleak to me in many respects. So that was my reservation about that whole body of work. Really, is there were beautiful individual dwellings that really pushed on this paradigm, but I think there's still sort of a missing quality there that recognizes that needs to recognize the need for community and connection in such an extreme environment.
So, well, let's go on to the Mars Society. So, you sent me an email in the Discord saying, "Matt, do you fancy having a go at the Mars Society?" Mars Society hand in, and of course, me being me, said, "Oh yes, I love that idea." Of course, not having anywhere near enough time to be able to.
Well, equally to be fair.
to do this, and but you gave it a go. You gave it a go, and you started building your submission. So tell us a little bit about your submission and where you started and how you sort of went about it.
So it became a bit of a lockdown project in some respects. Kept me amused in lockdown evenings, along with the only the lockdown project I had going at the time was the homemade telescope with the Raspberry Pi and the metal ductwork.
Oh yeah.
It was quite good fun. The PiCon, if anybody wants to Google for that, that's 3D printed parts to make your own telescope with a Raspberry Pi. So as a lockdown project, I developed a concept and an initial idea for it, but quickly became clear that it's such an expansive competition requirement that it requires a substantial team to really do it justice, to engage with all the different topics. And that's what some of the winning entries demonstrated is teamwork. So the competition this year was for the design of a Mars city-state of 1 million people. So it was nothing if not ambitious. And so the description on the website, the brief was a city-state of 1 million people that should be self-supporting to the maximum extent possible, relying on a minimum mass of imports from Earth. It is not necessary that the city-state be built in all one location. It can be done that way, or one or more central cities can be set up, supported by outlying bases. And then there were various points that you get for different aspects of the competition: technical design, economic, social, cultural, political, and aesthetic. And it had a lot of entries. The final count looking on the website, was that they received a total of 175 applications from over a dozen countries. And the final 5 chosen presented their proposals at the Mars Society Conference last year in October. With the first place going to a multinational team called Nexus Aurora, who had a really, really interesting submission that we can talk about. So I developed a concept for this and got as far as just sort of scratching the surface with it, but really tried to engage with that question of how you might use terrestrial urban design history to think about this competition and town planning and city planning on another planet. And my primary interests were around the question of ideas about the commons as a shared civic space and its relationship potentially to a breathable atmosphere, and how you avoid that sort of classic dystopian sci-fi scenario of somebody having control of the air, which has been visited many times through sci-fi in the past. So my project was called the Space That Launched 1,000 Ships, or Isotropic Planning for Resilience and Equality, a distributed network of Martian archipelagos, or How to Make Civic Space in a World That Has No Breathable Commons. So tried to wring as much as I could out of that title.
I really like that last one. How to make civic space in a world that has no breathable commons, because is this something that people think about a lot on Mars, or do you think you've really hit upon something? Because that does seem to be an extraordinary point.
Well, I mean, I'm not alone in thinking about obviously shared common or space as part of a future habitat, but I think questions around the politics of ownership and control of that space are critical and relate intimately to our understanding of a city. So my interest in the idea of a city and how we experience it on Earth is that a city is made of those civic public spaces. The buildings that are designed and built in a city, those buildings shape public space. And it's our ability to use that civic public space to have freedom of movement, to enjoy anonymity amongst so many people, which is a critical sort of mental protection in an environment of many strangers. Your ability to move around civic public space freely with anonymity is key. And my thinking around this was also influenced at the time around lockdown, because I was listening to the audiobook of the fantastic work of Rebecca Solnit, a book called Wanderlust. You've ever heard of that? It's a study of walking, the history of walking.
Oh, way.
It's a fantastic book that I can recommend to everybody. And the audiobook is particularly good, actually. So going on long lockdown walks, listening to a book about walking, Solnit explores the importance, the sort of emancipatory importance of walking and the freedom that it affords to not be reliant on other people's modes of transport or boundaries or territory. So these are all qualities that I think are key to making a city, and that's what influenced the proposal, really. So the idea was that you would construct small groups of settlements, and the mechanics of it I was looking at the time was around ideas that you might issue sort of a fleet at a time of 3 different communities to travel to Mars and set up a habitat, and that those communities might have slightly different agendas. It might be one commercial one state one, or somewhere in between, some sort of NGO. And they would set up a settlement adjacent to each other, but then have an agreement fundamentally to turn the space between those settlements into this shared common space. And then you would repeat that at a wider scale across the city. So thinking about the negative space between the settlements was my idea of what represents the heart of the city. And what I was doing there as well was exploring past examples of urban design proposals, and particularly the really interesting work of an architect called Eric Gloden, who around early 20th century had some urban design theories around the idea of a non-hierarchical city, where you wouldn't have a center as such. You would have a distribution of sort of nodes across the landscape of all equal importance. So there was no centre that could become the centre of power, I guess, and that economic activity would be wide and varied because there was no centre as well. So that was part of the influence there. And the backstory I discovered through that research was very interesting. Tragically, Gloden and his family were executed by the Nazis in 1944 for harbouring wanted people from the Gestapo. So to discover that at the time as well, and to think about the comparable histories of the likes of von Braun through that period was quite interesting. So.
Yeah. Well, certainly if you lived in that part of Europe, your fate was completely unknown, wasn't it?
Absolutely,
really? Yeah, horrendous.
So that was part of the history, and then another aspect to it was a classic piece of work by an Italian that formed the Nolli plan. Have you ever heard of the Nolli plan before?
No, I'm not. No.
So they're not Giambattista Nolli. I'll let you do the accents.
Giambattista Nolli.
That's it. Nailed it.
I think that's the one.
Nailed it. Well done. Yeah.
Thanks.
So the Nolli plan, or the Nolli map, an often cited sort of critical device for understanding cities, and it's a map of Rome in which he was drawing the layout of Rome, its buildings and its public spaces, and it's what's got a figure ground plan. And the figure, of course, is the buildings, and the ground, the open space between them. But the key difference that Nolli enacted with his plan is that he didn't just draw the spaces between the buildings, he also drew all the spaces within buildings, such as courtyards or churches, that were open public space you could go into. So what he was drawing was open, free space that the city consisted of. That history, that idea that the Nolli plan could influence the way you think about negative and positive space, vacuum versus building space, was a key part of that. To return to Fred Sharman's influence, that was a key part of sort of the opening idea for that section. That one of the quotes from Fred's space settlement book is, perhaps one could imagine that space is hard in another sense of the word, a kind of solid poche, an inversion of figure and ground in which humans carve out a cozy hollow softness within that hard space. The idea being that rather than taking the atmosphere around us for granted, in an interplanetary sense, where there is hardly any atmosphere, you have to carve an existence out for yourself in that space and make a civic, breathable commons.
It always feels like that anyway, in terms of, like, if you think about the story. Well, in my mind it is. I mean, I might be completely wrong, but in my mind, when you think about the way that Europeans went to the Americas, and like when you look at the story of Oklahoma or something like that, and just how crazy that of like a big land grab one morning and carving out your space and saying, this bit's mine. Yeah. It feels similar, but it feels like back when humans were making cities in the olden days, it was all haphazard. Like, take London, it's just there was no plan. It's just, I'm going to try and build it here. I'm going to squeeze this tiny building in between these two massive buildings.
And that's also been, a key part of the history of urban design discussion over the last few decades as well. How much you plan and organise a space versus how much you leave for chance and opportunity and ambiguity, which again is something we touched on in the interview we're going to share later.
There's bits of the interview I really love because it's the first time for me that I'm thinking about these things, and I'm sure you thought about them a lot. And
absolutely, and it raises questions of whether or not there is scope for accepting any sort of ambiguity in future plans when settling on another planet, because of course normally the expectation is that all these things have to be absolutely nailed down to the nth degree. That everything has to be fully understood, but that isn't historically how the most successful, vibrant cities have developed and grown up, of course.
Yeah, well, it's funny because it's like with events. When I'm teaching event management, I'm always talking about the importance of like planning everything and advancing everything. Right. But when I do it myself, I always leave quite a lot of room for improvisation because I know that the plan isn't going to. It's that art of war, isn't it? It's the plan isn't going to survive the first contact with the enemy. So I'm better prepared being able to think on my feet
Yeah.
And
Absolutely.
actually that you'll come up with a better plan, and everything will almost certainly work out for the best. The only time I've not seen that happen is the Fire Festival, which is an excellent documentary.
I've not seen that. Yeah, I heard about
really
that. But you weren't involved with that, were you?
No,
I
God,
thought you were
no,
going to tell me
God,
that
no.
you planned that to the nth degree. And
No, to be honest, it rang so true, the whole of that document. I had people literally phoning me up going, "Oh my God, did that remind you of anything?"
Really?
Matt? And yeah, it's a classic documentary about not planning enough. But they almost pull it off where there really isn't, where they had no right to.
Right.
But I always think that that's the same with things like this, is that there has to be a level of improvisation with something like Mars, because there's billions of unknowns.
Yeah, absolutely.
And worse, unknown
unknowns. Yeah, those tricky buggers. So that's a key question for me: is how do you foster a system which allows for that ambiguity? Because that's what every city thrives on. A civic public space can have a different role or purpose every few minutes. That seems very challenging, where every bolt and every airlock and every corridor has to be tightly controlled.
A space is almost certainly going to become something that you never envisaged it becoming, like Speaker's Corner, or, those kind of things, isn't it? And they're the exciting spaces. They're the spaces that people talk about.
That's a great reference, actually. How would you engender Speaker's Corner on a future Martian city, in a way that ensured that somebody couldn't neutralize it by switching off the air?
Yeah.
I mean, granted, there are days when Speaker's Corner perhaps could do with the air being switched off, but it's critical, isn't it? That's an absolutely perfect example. Where's the Martian Speaker's Corner?
How far did you get? How far did you get with your plans? And do you plan on building it up? And maybe we can have it as after seeing the Discord for the next Nexus Aurora that we're going to talk about.
Yeah.
That is something else, isn't it? Just for the Discord alone,
absolutely,
Nexus Aurora Discord,
it is. It's
monumental.
Yeah.
It's actually genius.
It's an amazing feat of collaboration. So with my own project, I got as far as a series of diagrams and key descriptions that set the tone for the piece, and then a few notes to share. So happy to put the link to the Google Doc in the notes for the show afterwards, and people can have at it. And I'd like to push it further. I'd like to explore it in more detail and see where it can take us. But yes, the winning entry for the Mars Society Con, the Nexus Aurora one, was a huge collaboration.
So let's talk about it. So, I mean, it really is extraordinary, isn't it? You watch the video of their interview with the Mars Society, with their grilling from Zubrin and people like that. It's like they really do come across as a bunch of people that have sort of surprised themselves almost.
Absolutely. And I think when we were talking about this earlier, I think one of the observations for me was that I think the Mars Society is to be commended for recognising what's been achieved with this submission and rightly awarding it first place. Because my gut reaction when I saw it was that some of the position they take over some topics questions those very things that previous Mars Society submissions have really focused on. So in the opening gambit for their presentation, they acknowledge that they're not going to talk about technical details. They're going to talk about decision making and how they got to the final conclusion, and that had me captured from the opening line. But yeah, so a multinational team, 50 plus members, 100 pages of technical reports, 5 gigabytes of renders and models, and 60,000 group messages to compile this thing. That's the summary in the end of their report. I mean, that alone is a feat of collaboration like nothing else.
It's unbelievable. But they were even quizzed by the quiz masters, like, who's the person leading all this? And there was no answer, was there, to that? Yeah. And I was thinking, well, how have they done this? I don't get it.
Yeah, I think there was one person responsible for sort of some of the questions and putting the report together finally, but ultimately there was no single leader, and that alone was really, really impressive.
It's very, very interesting.
Yeah.
It's super interesting how it's really interesting that just the way that they've used Discord as this amazing management system.
Yeah,
I've never seen anything like it. I'm gonna have to steal that for.
Well, that's the first thing I thought for the Spodcats. There's some really interesting sort of techniques there. But yeah, I've dabbled. I've signed up for the Discord, and when I've lurked long enough, I shall put my head above the parapet and talk about some ideas and see if there's any interest. So simply,
yeah. So, what was your favourite bit of their winning entry? What what sort of really grabbed you on it?
Well, I suppose there were overlaps with my own ideas around urban planning and the things I was just talking about city design. So if we start with that, then they reference the history of architecture and urban design. So straight away, I'm like, yeah, okay, somebody's paying attention here, which I really enjoyed. In their example, they turned to a British urban design concept called the Garden City that was developed by Ebenezer Howard. That's a phrase you might have heard before.
Yeah. No, I was really fascinated by that because I've actually looked up Garden City before because I kept thinking to myself, why is it called Welland Garden City? And it's like, oh, I get it now.
So Welland Garden City was one of the first attempts at the Ebenezer Howard concept of the Garden City, which sought to combine the best things of both the rural and urban existence. And some of Ebenezer Howard's early work diagrams showing this sort of the pull from these two places. That in the urban environment, much more labour can be achieved and things can get done, but it's an unpleasant environment to be in. In the rural environment, it's a pleasant environment, but it can be static and slow, and not a great deal gets achieved. So we sought to combine these two forces. Where I diverge from the Nexusaurus submission is that my argument would be that the Garden City proposal still had that centre. So if you look in the diagrams of the Garden City proposals, it's a radial diagram around a centre in zones. And there are different attitudes to the idea of naming and zoning a city, because whilst it can foster something and direct ideas and development, it can also hinder. So that was sort of the divergence for me between my own thoughts around that idea of the non-hierarchical city as a utopian idea versus the Ebenezer Howard one. But other aspects of it that were really interesting around the habitats themselves. So the habitats were very bold, ambitious, large structures that were a combination of the regolith mounding idea for radiation protection, with the big 5 meter thick walls around the outside edges, and then a 3 meter thick swimming pool over the structure. So there was
the very first thing I said to George as we were watching it was, 3 tons of water as a roof. What could possibly go wrong?
Yeah. It's slightly nerve wracking, I must admit. But they make a compelling argument for that. And again, where I was interested in their tone is that from the get-go they talk about wanting to dismiss and reject ideas around buried below ground habitats, and to hold on to the meager sunlight that is there as a resource for well-being as well. So I think that was something that really, really interested me too. So the sunlight filtered through that water top.
Yeah, well, it's definitely a massive plus. And the bit that interested me was that there was living spaces that clearly weren't that protected as well, these kind of public spaces that you would, I guess as a citizen, know you shouldn't spend too long in there, but you'd enjoy them while you're there.
Yeah, I think they sought to take a really balanced attitude with some of these things. And I think that's probably the outcome of having 50 plus commenters on it. It plays out in things like the section they have on EVA suits. I thought was very interesting. Is that the goal with the EVA suits is to make them dead easy to manufacture and repair. So they're not high precision bits of technology. They describe them as a partial pressure suit for minimum 8 hours use, or maximum rather, of the type worn by fighter pilots, rather than a really extensive suit. And then they combine that, I think, with an emergency setup like a hood that would just give you some breathable oxygen in an environment where, if there was a sudden emergency, you get from one space of the city to another. So that was very interesting. They had a really interesting position on a modular robotic platform. So to come back to the automation thing again, they committed to heavy automation throughout all their industry. But
what do they call it? The technosphere.
Yes, yeah, I think that was the phrase. But just a modular robotic system where each unit can have parts interchanged and easy to repair and fix with an open source design, I thought was very interesting. Again, the politics of ownership and control, much like the civic space discussion. You know the Boston Dynamics robots. You've seen those with the really incredibly advanced robots. Now, do you know how to turn one of those off? Because I don't.
No.
If one of those things came at me, I couldn't power it down.
You'd have to. Everyone would have to be equipped with a electromagnetic
yes,
pulse gun
probably, yeah. But so the idea of a robotic platform that was an open source modular setup, at least we might all know where the off switch is. So that could be good. So that was a few of the key elements to it in there. And then the final part of it that really probably just exposes my own politics is they really engage with the combination of the need for a welfare state in collaboration with independent corporation and business as well.
Did I hear UBI mentioned?
You did. So my left of centre politics alarm went off, and I was like, yeah, we'll have some of that. So yeah, what they call a pseudo UBI, which is there to provide fundamental life support and basic food. So I suppose their leverage for access to confidence in an oxygen supply is through their economic policy, the UBI, as an idea that you would be allowed that as a fundamental right. I guess slightly sullied for me in part of the report later on, where they then talk about the need for NFC chips to control access to different parts of the structure.
I mean, the whole technosphere was the humans were part of it, weren't they? As in, everything was part of the technosphere. So the robots running on AI, like a big Amazon warehouse, and the humans were part of that, and the AIs would make sure that if there's a bunch of people in one area, that they would get more oxygen pumped down there, and the whole thing was very. And they showed this kind of circular system and how it all worked, which I thought was really interesting. But yeah, there was a little bit of an alarm bell on my.
Well, I suppose fundamentally this is an accelerationist position. About a commitment and an acceptance to the value of technology and its ability to save the human race. Now, what I love about that discussion is that there's a left-wing accelerationist view and there's a right-wing version of that, and that phrase can be used in many different ways. So I think they smartly sort of played on elements of science and technology enthusiasm and passion that the Mars Society's historically, very famous for, but then gave it a slight twist with discussions around UBI and rights as well. And to be fair, it was a common discussion, I think, in some of the shortlisted entries too, to really engage with that question of liberty versus community.
Yeah, their whole economic structure, if I got this right, was to be such a big city and an industrious city that they would be selling to countries that wanted to have settlements on Mars. Yeah,
that was their central economic position. That I think they started by saying that relying on tourism was unrealistic. That only a handful of people will ever bother or be able to afford to just pay to go to Mars. So it had to have a serious industry. And they saw themselves, I think, what they called themselves a foundry for materials for other interplanetary settlements, which economically sounded like a very smart move. A bold move in the sense of the discussions that usually go on at the moment around planetary protection issues. So here we are making our first Mars settlement and we're strip mining the place.
But not only that, why do you need the humans? They've already started to prove that you can automate everything. Then it says, so why all the humans then? Why does there need to be these tens of thousands, millions of people living there?
For the poetry.
Yeah.
So that's what we're there for. To give meaning to the entire endeavour.
Yeah, but it does. Yeah, but that for me, that's what was missing then in that case was the meaning. I think when I was sitting there thinking, I wasn't sat. I thought that because it was Robert Zubrin that asked that question.
Yeah,
and I thought that at least that there would be a follow-up question to it, but presumably they were running out of time.
They were running. What was disappointing about that presentation, if I'm critical of the system, is that they had a very short time for questions. It seems on the presentation.
Yeah.
And if you watch the runner-up, the Australian team who came second place very closely, the final question, they don't actually even have time to answer it properly because they've got a sharp clock on it, which is a shame. There wasn't more debate and argument going on there. But on that question of sort of meaning and poetry, what I also quite liked about the submission is there's an area where they propose landmarks and the role of landmarks as a social sort of focal point. So they got an idea for a monument for fallen wanderers as a piece of architecture. Landmarks around technology for large infrared telescopes. But they have a thing called the Tree of Life, where they propose to plant a giant redwood tree on day one. and then protect it and encapsulate it in a structure that becomes a huge landmark as well. So there was poetry and humanity in that submission.
Yeah. I love things like that, but imagine how, if you only had one giant redwood tree that meant so much, it'd be a little bit stressful, wouldn't it?
It would, especially when you've run out of fuel, and somebody thinks, you know what, we could burn the tree.
We could burn the tree. Let's just go for it. Well, I mean, it's just, it's just sod's law, isn't it? That it will get a disease and die, and it holds so much meaning. Yeah. It's a bit like the ravens at the Tower of London. Yeah, it's like, why have you done that? Because now when they do fly off, everyone's going to fall into despair. Well, moving on from this, we had a really interesting interview earlier on in the week with an artist and an architect.
A collaborative team. But I mean, really, it's an art project called the Mars House, which is going to be built in Bristol, just down the road from, well, it's kind of equidistant from us too, isn't it? It's the halfway point. We'll have to meet up for a future episode, yeah. Be perfect.
We definitely have to meet up for that episode. And they're building this Mars House. And, well, you're here. It's a really interesting way round about thinking about this particular issue. Should we play it?
Let's do it.
Let's do it. Hey, Cootie!
The Interplanetary Podcast is alive!
First of all, welcome to the podcast, Owen and Nikki. I'll let you go first, Nikki.
Yeah, so my name's Nikki Kent. I'm an artist and I work with my friend Ella Good. And we have created a project called Building a Martian House. The project is to do just that. It is a massive co-design project where we're going to be building a Martian house in the middle of Bristol, and it's already been designed through a process with the public, and we're going to be building in summer 2022. When it's in Bristol, it's not just a finished example, it's still an invitation for people to come along and to help us build across the 6 months that it will be on the harbour side in the centre of Bristol.
So how did you get to this project idea then, Nikki? You mentioned in your video the experience you had at the Utah Analog Research Centre. How were you introduced to this field?
Well, so me and Ella, I guess we just spend a lot of time looking on the internet at different things like this, like these missions that are happening here on Earth, and scientists practicing to go to Mars. And we just, we saw lots of examples of this over many years. Like we used to talk about Mars 500 years ago. And then we really got interested in the Mars One project, where they asked lots of people to apply to be the first humans on Mars. And then we also saw the Mars Desert Research Station. So it over quite a long period of time, a few years, we were kind of looking out of our own interest and talking about it when we would go on long car journeys together. And because we're artists, we're used to kind of, if we find something interesting, we think about how can we make something to do with it. I guess it's quite simple. We saw lots of people were building houses around the world for practicing life on Mars, and we thought, let's have a go at making our own. Really, it's like you see one thing and you think, let's do our own. And then as soon as we started to do that, we realised we actually didn't really know anything about Mars, and we're not scientists. And we tried to draw a design, and it's just a circle with a plant in the middle and a solar panel on it. And I've still got it now, but we had no idea. So we thought, okay, we're going to have to do a lot of research. And also we realised it actually wouldn't be possible for the two of us to make something that was good in any way. And that's when we decided to start inviting people to help us. And that's what the project has actually become.
Is that where Owen steps in then?
I think Ella and Nikki had been talking or looking at Mars for sort of 10 years before, a long time before we'd got involved.
No. No. It'd been quite a few years. And then within this idea of just like telling loads of people about the project, we told the Architecture Centre here in Bristol about it and went for a chat with them. And then when we were talking to them, they were like, have you heard of Hugh Broughton Architects? Because they would be perfect to help with this, because they designed the British Antarctic Research Station and all of the similarities between that, with that living in isolation, and extreme weather conditions, and the similarities in Mars and Earth in the Antarctic.
The technical challenges for extreme environments are obviously a key part of this, and fascinating for me as an architect to consider. But I must admit that the fact that this is the seed of this idea began with artists, I thought was particularly interesting. And you do yourself a disservice with that description about just a circle with some plants and a solar panel, because actually, if you go on the NASA server, much of the proposals are a bit like that. So the co-working, the co-design element and the workshops are a particularly interesting part that I thought might surely give this project some richer territory to explore in terms of the social experience and cultural experience and people's needs and desires for the home. So what sort of things have come out of the workshops that you ran?
So we've done quite a lot of workshops and with lots of different types of people. Some of them have been academics, like actual scientists that have worked on projects that have gone to Mars, some psychologists, and then some with the public, and those being sometimes school children and sometimes retirees who are interested in lectures, like really varied. And I think we've kind of also, we've not just said, we're designing a house for Mars, what do you think? We've kind of given people conversation starters. We've narrowed down the conversations to get people really started. Like an example of this is we built a replica of the bedroom on the International Space Station, which is really just a cupboard with a sleeping bag in it and a laptop. But it was really so that people could walk into a space and see what it felt like and see how small an astronaut's bedroom is now and how minimal it is. And then from there, be able to start questions. Well, if we were redesigning the bedroom, what would we take with us to another planet?
What do you think the primary outcomes were? What were the primary themes coming out of those conversations?
Well, we spoke a lot about private space and about some of that is cultural. Like we're in Bristol, everyone wants their own private space, and it might not be like that if you did this in another place in the world. And also about the ideas about being able to customize a space and being able to choose it, not wanting it to be too... mostly we see space design as being very slick and not very homely, but people might not actually want to live in that long term. And then people being very interested in colour and touch and things like that, and thinking about what they might miss from Earth in that kind of sense of things.
When you were doing workshops with various, all these different groups, is there a recurring theme that starts to develop, and one that you spot that you were surprised about?
Toilets. Everyone wants to talk about toilets in space. It always comes up. What's it going to be like? How do you do it? Even how you have a shower. You know, some of the really normal things that you do on a day-to-day basis are the things that people want to know if they will be different. You know, how will things change for me in my daily life when I'm in space? So I'd say those themes always come up again. And then we had kind of similar things that people want to take with them. Pets often came up, and laptops. Kids wanted to take like a computer with them or something to play with. They were kind of reoccurring, but it's the ones that are completely left field, I think, are the ones that have stuck with us. Like, why would you take anything from Earth? You're on Mars. I wouldn't take anything. You're there on Mars. Don't take anything with you. It was kind of something that we talk about quite often, I think.
Yeah, there was this, I always refer to this one woman on this day of the workshop. Everyone was talking about like, oh, let's make it all green and blue like Earth. And let's, have the smell of grass in the air, like freshly cut grass and things like that, like very earthly things. And then this woman came in and she was like, no, why would you do that? That is terrible for your mental health. You're going to Mars and you need to celebrate where you are and enjoy it. And she kind of gave this example of how her husband had been a coach driver for holidaymakers, like pensioners going from England to Europe. And he would drive people to Europe. And then when they got there, they complained about that the food wasn't like the food from home, or the hotel wasn't like a British hotel. And really all those people, on these trips just wanted to look at Europe through the window and not be part of it. And she kind of was like, currently our designs for Mars were just not really experiencing or thinking about being on Mars.
So that's really interesting, because I think I was curious about whether or not the workshops had explored that question of what sort of support items, mental, psychological support items, people might want to take with them in that process around that question of well-being in an extreme environment. So I don't know whether that's anything that Owen, in your work before in terms of extreme environments and the time at Hugh Broughton ever came up, that question of how the internal environment needs to reflect either home or homely comforts versus just the raw machine qualities required to survive in that space.
I think one thing that's important to note about this project is, from an architectural team, we've sort of designed the shell and core of the building. We're designing, the services and the layout. But when it actually gets on site, there's 6 months of continued workshops with the public. So we deliver the house, and there's 6 months to decide what should be in it to make it a home and what's important. From sort of Antarctica, there's definitely some well-being sort of lessons learned. Big one, probably the hydroponic living room. So in Antarctica, the hydroponic growing systems are often places that the residents like to congregate around. So in the American bases, you can actually book the hydroponic room to have your meetings. So that was something that we were kind of keen to integrate. And then also in Antarctica, there's issues of sensory deprivation. So we've often, in Halley 6, Hugh Broughton architects specified Lebanese cedar, because it's the only veneer that gives off a scent. So it's quite subtle things like that we thought, the hydroponics in our Martian house are there for, production of some fresh food and fresh vegetables, but are also there to be tended by the residents, because it sort of might be slightly homely, but also gives those sort of sensory deprivation alleviating sort of characteristics.
So is it being used as an opportunity to test some of these material choices and details in a fairly technical way, or is it more a mock-up or a visual representation of the spaces and types of experience you might have?
Well, we're working on that at the moment. We're going through the technical design, and we want this house to be as realistic as possible. So when it's finished, maybe ask us that question again, and we'll let you know how we've got on with building it as realistically as we would on Mars. There's definitely sort of some of the servicing and waste treatment sort of technologies we're looking to integrate, but there's lots of things at play in terms of time, budget, etc. So let's see in what is it now? It's 8 months' time when it opens. We'll have a conversation about how realistic the detailing, etc. is.
Sounds
I
like
guess
any project.
Yeah, that's one thing me and Ella have always said, is we want to make it as real as possible, see what's really achievable by people who have a fraction of the budget of NASA, what can we build that's actually real? Sometimes I think, is that a totally ridiculous thing to say? And then sometimes I think, oh, maybe it will, have some water recycling system in it and real plants and be powered by solar panels and, push the bits that we can as far as we can, because I think that is exciting for a public to see it being actually real.
Yeah. So will anybody be living in it overnight for any period of time, or is it just for visitors?
Well, okay. It would be nice for someone to stay in it. And me and Ella have spoken about that a lot. And we kind of are like, maybe someone could stay in there for a weekend and maybe make something from that inspired by it. Maybe an artist could stay in it. But it's mostly the purpose will be building it and then showing it to a lot of people.
Well, I'm sure Matt will be keen to stop over if there's opportunity.
I was just about to say, it sounds like the perfect opportunity for a weekend for an interplanetary podcaster to pretend he's on Mars for a bit.
Ah, great.
And so if you need a guinea pig, I'm totally up for
it. Great.
Some of those things came out of the workshop that have inspired the layout. So, dinner parties on Mars are quite important. So the downstairs is a flexible, you can open it out. So actually, there is talk of hosting some Martian dinner parties when it's up in Bristol, and hydroponic views to landscape, and Martian sports was something that we had long conversations with. I mean, on the ISS, the residents spend hours on running machines trying to stay fit. So how we can sort of integrate low gravity sports was, we had some great conversations at the University of West England with the interior students about what and they invented a whole series of sports and games that could be played that, rather than having to run around on a running machine, would be integrated into the design. And that some of the early concept designs, because this is a house that we see sitting within a larger base, it's not meant to be fully self-sufficient, though it does have the majority of the life support systems integrated. But within the actual wider base, we try to integrate exercise into the way you get round, rather than having to spend hours locked in a room each time. And those are all sort of conversations that have either come out of, workshop conversations where people find it quite boring on a running machine all the time, or Ella and Nicki having conversations with people like Andre Stewart, who is at the Hawaiian Space Exploration Annable, and he was just talking about how difficult it is being surrounded by people at all times, and all he wanted was private space. So, having private bedrooms was kind of super important, but then, we try and make things multifunctional if we can. So that's why it can open up into this sort of living room.
That's a really interesting point about it being sort of its own thing, even though it might be part of a larger complex. Is that, because I've not really sort of really thought about that before, about lots of different individuals bringing their own type of habitat that can somehow plug in to a sort of much bigger system. That is that one of the thinking behind the project, that a way of sort of maybe becoming more personalized as a space in terms of not just how you sort of do out the interior, but the actual building as well? Because when you go to towns and villages, it's not like all the houses are the same. They're all individual and different. Is that embedded in it?
To be honest, I'd say no. It's like, we have designed this house, but actually it's a lovely idea. What we have created is we think of them as sort of private, semi-private areas, and then public space. And the public space is, the largest within the base. So these are sort of little neighborhoods where you get the very small private area. But what we have talked about is, we want this to go around the world. And this is kind of quite a Western focused design probably of the house. Definitely all the conversations we've had have been, mostly in the UK. So if you went and asked, someone in Japan or Singapore, you probably get a very different internal solution. Would it be the external solution change as well? I'm not sure, probably, in terms of the amount of space and size they need. I think the construction method we're proposing could be adapted to be more bespoke for a different culture or different type of person's needs. But no, I think it'd be great if there was a whole little street of different sort of houses that have grown that. And probably space collaboration seems to be coming back. Russia and China are building a new international space station, or proposing they will. And so maybe on Mars, it won't just be, an American base and an ESA base and a SpaceX base. It will actually be, the Mars town, and it's kind of got modules and stuff plugged together, which would be great to see.
Well, I mean, even the space station itself is a bit like that. It's ESA modules and US modules and Russian modules all, and they all do have their. You can tell which is which. You can tell that somehow it's got a European edge to it. Well, it's weird.
Italians, they have the coffee machine. It's got the espresso maker in space. It's fantastic.
Yeah, I'm pretty convinced the Russians have a vodka dispenser, but that they're not telling anyone about.
Definitely.
They're too busy plugging leaks, aren't they?
Yeah, that's what's caused them.
That's what's caused it. Yeah. That question of public versus private space, I think, is certainly a key interest for me when I look at proposals for interplanetary habitation, because it seems to me that we're, of course, in terrestrial circumstances, used to civic and public and shared space happening between buildings or between habitation in leftover spaces or formerly proposed civic spaces. But of course, on other worlds, that space is a vacuum and still has to be built and managed and created. So I think that seems to be a key part of the discussion about future habitations and how we get that balance right between public and private space. Certainly. But when it comes to the construction then, is there any particular part of in situ materials and technical aspects of the project that you're hoping to pursue?
We are. So the house is split over 2 levels, and essentially anything to do with life support is proposed as coming from either Earth or reused from a rocket. And that's because astronauts don't like playing or fiddling or building their life support systems. So it's proposed that any sort of that sort of technology will come from probably reuse of a rocket, and that's buried the lower level. And then the upper level of the house, we're proposing an inflatable formwork. So it's influenced from sort of I don't know if you've seen any refugee disaster housing. It's quite often impregnated concrete fabrics. But in this case, it is an inflatable that's actually filled with, or proposed to be filled with regolith, providing your radiation shielding, and using bacteria to actually solidify or calcify the regolith inside. So you have your inflatable that seals in the regolith, which is can be quite poisonous. And within that inflatable, you could integrate all your services and insulation, etc. And then it's filled, solidifies. There is sort of research into the bacteria solidifying regolith, but at the temperatures we're talking about on Mars, there is still a bit of probably some genetic modification or work that needs to be done to actually get the bacteria to do a job not too slowly, and that seems to be the problem. So actually we're reusing the regolith, but not in major ways related to the house. It's just for the upper level to do the radiation protection. But the sort of wider base, because we recognize that there's going to be, for the small amount of hydroponics we've proposed, but actually within the house, food production is going to have to be scaled up significantly. There'll be areas for vehicles. There'll probably be some office and lab space. And depending on how you feel about it, probably some sort of nuclear power.
Oh no!
Yeah, it's not
This is like the.
This is
where the. I guess this is where actually, it's quite an interesting point about the project. About okay, so there's this idea of needing to have all the answers. You know, you're designing a house for Mars, but actually, maybe we don't need all of the answers. By leaving some of them open, leaves it that the future's not already decided. It's for us to decide. And I guess the purpose of the project is to build an optimistic vision of the future. And so it's funny because we spoke about this thing about we need 2 power supplies, and one of them would be solar power, but we need a backup. And you would, like, if we speak to the scientists, they say you would have nuclear. But it's not really in keeping with the idea of a hopeful future. So I think perhaps at the moment, it's like that could be open. It could be like not everything is chosen already. We can decide what that other power source is together. Is it people power? Is it like more using little bits of power to make up that additional one rather than having a nuclear power?
I think this debate's one of the healthiest bits about the project, actually, is that it brings these 2 alternative views to the table.
But yeah, I mean, one of the things that I would say about that is and this is a point that Rob's made to me a few times about how when people start living on Mars and sort of taking part as, particularly if they're not going home, then it's like they will start making their own cultural rules, won't they? And so at that point, you kind of lose control of the situation anyway. It'll be that they'll be sitting there going, "This is the solution we need, surely." With Mars, or is that something that's come up in terms of trying to look at what might happen as a sort of cultural shift as people start to live like that?
I guess it's very much rooted in Earth. Like the conversations are really about what do we want to take with us if we can choose. And I think there's this bigger thing about the future in general and the way we think about it and the way we think of it as being something that is too big for us to have any impact on. And we're kind of sold messages of apocalyptic futures. And actually the future's not yet decided. And maybe we can spend some time thinking about how do we want the future to be? What future do we actually want to live in? And then in doing that, seeing that, we'll be able to make it how we want, rather than being like, but actually, we have, the power supply, the supplies of power that aren't good for the environment. Let's just
we see the project as prototype 1. So this is the prototype of a Martian house, but we see other ones coming. So I think there'll be lessons and, those kind of cultural things. Hopefully you can start having those discussions when the house is up, with the public in situ, and then that might change things going forward if we do round 2 or round 3 or round 4 as we go forward, as it evolves. It's a constantly moving, changing thing that's kind of impossible to define, I guess, at the moment.
So is this prototype being built in Bristol part of a small part of a larger master plan? You've mentioned a few other elements too about shared space and the bigger base. Have you got designs and drawings underway?
So the starting point for me as an architect, when we'd gone through a couple of years of workshops and so many discussions, we'd done briefing meetings with the artists and scientists, and we had this kind of vision of what might go into the house, but I had to sort of clear it up in my mind of what it was and where it was sitting, and wanted to develop that narrative. So there is some designs and layouts for how this, might work as a wider base that is definitely inspired by Hugh's work in Antarctica, because we can look at the work that Hugh has done and think about the kind of spaces we might require and the proportions of spaces. And it just helped me drawing. It's not a 3D model. It's not drawn in any particular detail. But when I was sort of thinking, what is this house actually like and what do you need in it? And it came to actually draw it. Having a wider picture really, really helped.
And I guess some of the big questions, if we only had the house for, two people to live in, some of the big questions about mental well-being cannot even be addressed in any way, because you definitely can't live just two people. So you kind of have to have the further base designed. And me and Ella often talk about the central shared space as being a village hall type space, a space for people coming together. And when we build the house, we plan to make an event that is about what happens in this imagined village hall on Mars, as a way of incorporating a lot of the questions about culture and fun and future in like something that lots of people can come to.
Just the introduction of the term village hall for me is interesting, because of course it's not the sort of vocabulary normally used in discussions about interplanetary habitation. So I think that's really healthy. It's interesting how you talk, Nikki, about impacts on the environment and your reactions to ideas around nuclear power, because of course the environment there is very different to the environment we might be used to choosing to protect or care about here on the Earth. And it's a topic that causes a lot of discussion around ideas about planetary protection and just the very act of going there and having an impact on the surface of Mars being an environmental or ecological question mark. So is there particular qualities about the environment or the Martian space that you would be keen to preserve? And what's your attitude to environment there?
That's a really interesting question, because mostly we talk about the Martian environment creating a kind of, the restrictions of it being a harsh environment where there's limited resources and, a lot of the, so this idea of everything you need, you have to take with you. And so then it really makes you discuss what is important, what do you need to take with you. If water is really precious, like you can really see the water system in front of you, rather than on Earth, it feels, even though it is limited, it feels like it feels endless. So we more think of it from that direction, the idea of how can it help us, how can the restrictions of Mars help us think about Earth, rather than it being about, we're really, I guess the project isn't about us pioneering people going to Mars. It's more about how can we use this to think about the future here on Earth, and how is then it relevant to a much wider public, because these conversations are about all of us, because all of us have a stake in the future on Earth. Yeah.
So it foregrounds your relationship with resources and energy systems and life cycle systems.
It's very similar to, which is of course what the writer of Dune, that was kind of his starting point, was ecological collapse and trying to think of what it would be like if you lived in a desert world, a bit like Mars, I suppose, where it's a crime to steal someone's water, punishable by death, and things like that. So yeah, it's really interesting, isn't it, to kind of think about how we all might get changed by the different types of environment that we find ourselves in. And that's kind of, you as an artist, is that the sort of major push of the work, is to try and make us think more about life on Earth, rather than, like you said, rather than trying to solve a technical problem of habitation on Mars, which I'm sure the architects are trying to do, but but the purpose of the actual project itself, how would you describe it?
Yeah, it is about what there is a massive relevance in us using this as a scenario to help us think about how we all live. And that being really, well, what is the job of an artist? And, it's to make people think, to start conversations. And that's what the work is about. And in it being as real as possible, it kind of, I always think if you almost, you help with those conversation starters, and people don't need to really think so much just about the issue. They get to it themselves by the provocation, if that makes sense.
Through your workshop experience, do you think then, as this podcast is so much about science communication, and Matt does such a fantastic job of that in every episode, do you think there's a particular experience about the workshops that's given you a view about how best to do science communication and to engage in these topics with a variety of people? We've been working with scientists and engineers from University of Bristol for a few years, and we discuss our workshops with them, and we make them together sometimes, and they will come along. And I'm always amazed how up for listening and like these scientists are. Like, it's not all about just telling us the answer. That I feel like the thing that they find exciting is listening to a public, and also kind of not being open to being wrong, or just listening to our suggestion and being like, you might think they know a lot more, and so they could speak, but actually that's the big interest. Like, science maybe isn't just for the scientists, it's for all of us to talk about.
Yeah, I mean, from my point of view, I think that a good scientist is one that seeks out the things that prove them wrong, almost. And something like Mars is great because no one knows, and therefore it's just continual discovery, and that's what scientists should find. And actually, it's what artists and scientists and musicians and all those, anyone who's creative loves that whole idea of searching into going into the unknown, and that's what you're doing, isn't it, really?
Yeah, and I guess that's actually one of the things that really attracted us to building the Martian House, because we saw that people were doing this all around the world, and there were lots of different versions, and something we could do maybe could be as valid as, like what NASA is doing, or what studies the European Space Agency has done before. We saw that there was a space which feels very exciting, because when you think about research into space, you think of it as something that's cost billions of pounds, as it is just for the superhumans and the experts. And then suddenly we were like, no, this is just about living. And nobody knows how a human will react when they get to Mars. And we're all experts in living, so let's invite everyone.
It's a novel concept, isn't it? Because I know with all the other analogues that have been built, that they've built them with a particular question in mind. So they've always had a question that they desperately need to answer at that point, whereas this one feels more like an open-ended question.
Yes, yeah, definitely. And I guess it is quite different to the analogues, because lots of them aren't looking at the technologies of, it's more about the conditions of that isolation rather than how you recycle things within the house. So I guess we're kind of a mix between those two things.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So you're actually doing some of the science more than than the scientific basis in some way.
Well, different parts of the science.
Yeah.
I don't know. Do you know these people called the Calgary Space Workers Society?
No, not heard of them.
So they are an advanced inventors club in Calgary, and they are building their own. It was lunar houses, but now it might be Mars as well. And they're kind of engineers, retired engineers, and they're building stuff in their back garden that is really high tech. It's techie and complicated. They've done stuff they've had links with the International Space Station, and maybe they've made one of their caravans oxygen sealed or something. It kind of is quite inspiring to see what people are doing in their back gardens as well. And I guess, so it is some people are really just looking at the technology in a really detailed way, and some people are looking at the isolation and the well-being and conditions like that, even though actually I don't think they really necessarily address design and well-being within the design, because those isolation studies are normally in shipping containers and just big domes and not thinking about other things. So it's completely something else.
Collaboration, though, and sort of that backyard can-do mentality, I think, is starting to build now through the sort of new space interest that have generated the last few years. Matt and I have been looking this week at the recent winning submission for the Mars Society competition, Nexus Aurora, and there's some really interesting projects. And Owen, you've been involved, I think, in some of that. And the winning scheme there was a huge open source project with 50 plus members, with an international team.
If you're on their Discord, it's an amazing place. I don't know.
I've never seen anything like it. We've been dipping in this week.
So it's I think it's really interesting to see these ideas now becoming richer and more diverse through a wider engagement with these concepts beyond just JPL, NASA, and the historical parties to that.
In terms of the public and science, I mean, some of the members the people who we've been talking to a lot in the team, are working directly on missions for Mars at the moment. So, Robert Myhill was designing the sensors for Mars quakes on the InSight rover. So when we're in a Zoom call or he's, talking to the public or some children at a workshop, actually he knows. And, it's not often that you can get that exposure, as a normal punter, being able to ask someone, oh, well, what is that? What's your conversation with the rover like today? And we're in Zoom calls and he's like, oh yes, I'll contact NASA and get that data sent over for the thing. So it is, it's really exciting for us as to have, those type of people involved, but also I can imagine for the public as well, it adds that level of realism that, we keep telling everyone it's a real, a real Martian house. We are going to build this as realistically as we possibly can. And when you've got someone there who can show you what their rover's up to on Mars, it's definitely gets people excited.
If you can describe really what this installation is going to look like and what people visiting it might see and once it's finished and what the experience is going to be like.
I think Nicki should take this because I can describe it as the drawings are available and that's what we're intending to deliver in terms of its externally and internally. It's, as I said, it's a shell that we expect, 6 months of workshops and interaction with the public for Ella and Nicki to change it beyond recognition. But I think that's that for us as a sort of traditional design team of structural engineers and M&E engineers and architects, giving your building over, which is definitely unfinished to the public, is really
So Nicki, describe what it would be like for me to walk in on day one and what it might be like for Rob to walk in on the final day.
Okay, so day one, it will be a blank canvas, an empty shell with maybe a toilet. That's debatable at the moment to see what happens on that. And then across the process, there'll be lots of workshops that are really varied. And some of them, will be things that children can be involved in and other things that will be more for adults with the scientists and engineers will be joining us for them. And then at the end, we hope that we will have filled it, and we will have filled it from objects. So, for example, if we build a shower, we'll also think about what soap are we going to use on Mars as well, and how do you get those things to Mars, and what will Martian clothes look like, and how will the bedroom be decorated. And we'll work with, maybe we're looking at having 2 different sleep pods for that. And if we work with 2 different groups of people, maybe the designs will look really different. So there'll be lots of stuff and ways that people can get involved, like helping us think about it and be practical. And then we're going to be doing tours as well, so that people can come and just have a look at it. And so the last month should be more focused on the tours to show what we've made along the way.
Sounds really interesting. And I think that the idea that it isn't just some pristine piece of architecture that Owen hands over on day one and is still the same on the last day, but it's something that is hackable, changeable, and engaged with through events. Sounds really
I think it'll be like the most lived house you've ever seen. So it's the house where someone's collected all these objects throughout life, but from, children to, old people to, different communities. It'd be like hundreds of people from different backgrounds have all lived in the same house. So I hope it's completely full of different and wonderful objects.
It's going to be like a hoarder's house. How long is it up for? How long is it? Does it
6
run
months.
for?
So we should be building in the first 3 months of next year. It'll be up 6 months, and then it's designed to be taken down again, and then hopefully we'll go on tour and find a new home somewhere else.
Will it keep all the things that were already in it, or are you going to start with a blank canvas again?
I guess it depends who wants the house. If it's totally flexible if it was a display of what Bristol has made, or if it's a space for new ideas, we would be up for both.
There was talk, one of your questions was about if it was an analog. It would be lovely to go and actually bury the bottom of the house and put it in situ and, go live in it for a longer period.
Yeah, the living in it would be interesting, wouldn't it? I just always think with things like that, unless you add the extreme element of danger in, it doesn't quite quite work as an analog.
Yeah, we have talked about how can you make the public or people living there feel like they are cut off or separated. So there's things we're doing internally to do with air handling. So it is all sealed and you're not naturally ventilating. But also there was discussion about when you arrive to visit it, you're given your spacesuit, and you have to wear your spacesuit as you march through the centre of Bristol before you're allowed into the building, and you can't take it off until you've gone through the airlock. And there's, that obviously doesn't replicate the dangers of space, but it can go some way in maybe demonstrating how awkward it might be when you've got sort of 6 people all wearing helmets trying to get through a door. So we can try.
Yeah, I always think things like that are really important. Just how frustrating things can get. Like if I'm doing DIY and it's like a screw that's not quite coming out, I get particularly annoyed and angry. So presumably those sort of things happen all the time if you were trying to, settle Mars. maybe I'm not psychologically cut out for Martian.
Yeah, one long DIY project because it's almost literally a machine for living in, because it's your life support system surrounding you all the time. So you can't afford to just kick it and get cross with it. You've got to nurture it and care for it in a different way. So I think that's the overlap with the well-being aspects that I'm really interested in, is how your relationship to the home and its material and spaces has to become so intimate because it's so critical for your survival.
Yeah, it's really interesting, isn't it? That idea of if you took it to different, particularly sort of very different countries, like you said, Japan or Nigeria or somewhere like that, and you took it to places like that, how it would end up looking, and would it be anywhere near similar to what we've got in Bristol?
I would find that very exciting thing to do, especially thinking about what we do after this. We've spent 6 years on the project so far, and so thinking what we do next, it would be nice to do it and keep on.
If you got, say, 10 of them, you could average it all out so everyone would be unhappy.
That's a principle that the architecture profession has applied for centuries, Matt. The modular man, the average universal person, which has afflicted architecture for a long time. That's what you get.
Slightly less than 2 eyes.
Yeah.
Right. So, well, thanks very much for coming on. It is a really interesting project. I love the open-ended question about it, and the fact that it's sort of stepped outside of the normal analogues that you see. I think I can't wait to come and visit. It's actually not too far away from where I live.
Let us know when you come down if you want a tour.
Yeah, interesting combination of arts and architecture combined. It's really
Great.
Interesting, guys. So thanks
Thank
a lot.
you.
Actually, before you go, what's the best place for people to kind of go and look at the project and find out about it?
So we've got Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, Building a Martian House. If people want to join them, then that's going to be really up-to-date news. And when we're doing stuff, we'll be posting so people can see. And then we've got a website, ellaandnicki.com, and it's Nicki, Nicki.
The Interplanetary Podcast, putting the ace back into space.
Well, there we go. That I thought that was really interesting, and I thought that there's definitely some bits that we need to talk about.
Yeah,
from that.
Absolutely. Yeah,
there's some moment now for me, and this goes back to this Nexus Aurora, is there are people that want to. Everyone's always continually trying to put their image, their kind of worldview on what they believe is a fresh start.
Yeah.
And it's like, it's not a fresh start at all, because it's carrying your baggage that you're not even seeing as baggage. And I thought that came across in Nexus Aurora, and really in that interview as well, I thought.
Yeah, very much so. And I think what that interview suggested was that this project might offer a more open framework for people to bring ideas to the table, both in the way it was developed through the workshops that they've undertaken and described. But the idea they were describing around it being unfinished and people being able to comment and input on it, I thought was a really interesting one. But
they seem to have constraints on that discussion.
Yeah, tensions.
And Nexus Aurora had the same restraint as well, that no nuclear power.
I think so, yeah. In the report for Nexus Aurora, they seem to suggest that they believe solar energy alone is sufficient, with very large fields of thin film solar panels rolled out across the landscape. And they talk about avoiding the geopolitics of a nuclear launch and getting material to Mars, which I thought was a pretty bold position to take. So it's interesting to see that come up again in that discussion between the artist and the architect there.
With the Nexus Aurora, you could I guess is you could put that down to practicality.
Yeah.
But definitely in the Mars House, it was an ideological viewpoint, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was. It was a question about the environment, which I thought was interesting, because it makes you think differently about the Martian environment and about how perhaps we should treat it more preciously and take more care over it, which I think was the artist's position, her instinct, probably informed by the workshop discussions with the public she'd had as well. And her point about what was the phrase she used? Do we need to have all the answers? So that question about space for ambiguity again, I thought was very interesting too. Do we need to have all the NG answers when we first arrive? I mean, most engineers would reel in horror at that and say, well, absolutely, yes, we do.
Yeah, I mean, it's quite funny, because I always perceive architects as being somewhere between engineers and artists. So you are the sort of halfway people. You've got the engineers who really are only concerned with, how does this bit of metal fit with this metal, and is it the right way of doing it, and will it last?
Yeah. Yeah.
And then you've got the artists who only want to talk about the human experience of that particular thing. And then you've got the architects that bridge the gap. Is that actually a fair way of seeing the trade of architecture?
Yeah, I'd like to think so. So the arrogant amongst us would say that we are both artists and engineers. The humble amongst us might suggest that we just have enough skills to be able to mediate between those two positions, rather than fully embrace the skills required to be either of those.
Do you think that Elon Musk could perhaps do with a little bit more artistry in his life? I mean, I know he's married to an artist.
Yeah, he is, and it was certainly interesting to see between them the carbon emissions question between NFT sales and rocket launches on the same day last week. Or the week before, was it? I can't recall now.
Yeah, it was the week before. That was definitely a crazy day for the Musk family, wasn't it?
It was, yeah.
Grimes selling 3.5 million quid's worth of NFTs, and everyone going, "What the hell's an NFT?" Yeah. And then Elon Musk landing a. I mean,
you might argue that there is artistry already in the SpaceX model, because the drive that he brought to that organization for his goal and aspiration to land on Mars comes from a place of perhaps artistry and poetry and human aspiration more than it does just engineering desire, perhaps.
Perhaps, yeah. It's always hard to tell with Musk, isn't it? I mean, he's infuriating to try and really. I think he does. I genuinely think he wants to make humans interplanetary, and it's he fears for humanity and all those things. But sometimes he actually forgets the humanity of it.
Yes, I think that's a very good summary. Actually, yeah.
It's very odd, isn't it? And I think actually there's hints of that as we go through looking at those plans. It's been absolutely ace having you on, Rob, because it's really nice to have a look at subjects through someone else's expertise.
Thank you. I've really enjoyed it, and it's also been interesting as a podcast experience is that I normally have to express myself with drawings. When I'm teaching, I'm doing it by the end of a pencil as I'm talking. So to do it in a podcast environment has been good fun. So what's next week?
Next week, Lynn's back by popular demand.
Fantastic.
And we're going to talk about Mars science.
That sounds amazing. We were all bowled over by Lynn in that episode.
Yeah, Lynn's great. Lynn's really great. And she's got the best microphone, annoyingly.
Yeah.
She's even outbeat me on the microphone.
Yeah, don't rub that in. I've had enough grief with microphones this week. I hope this one's been all right.
It just goes to show that that you never know if something's going to bite you. Going to Mars and you've got a billion things that can go wrong.
Yeah.
That's the thing.
I should have just embraced the ambiguity.
Trust me, I've had the most technologically demanding day of all time today.
Have you?
I've been trying to make a video for the college, and every time I've been doing it, the camera's out of focus for some bizarre reason, or my phone kept crashing, and I was sort of videoing it on both, so both had to be working, but most of the time one of them wasn't.
Nice.
It was like the opposite situation of redundancy.
I'm sure as a species we're ready to go to Mars.
When I can get a home printer that works, then we're ready to go to Mars. But that seems to be getting further away.
It does. It does. That Twitter meme that starts "Hear me out, XXX." The best one I ever saw was "Hear me out, a printer, but it works." I think I absolutely put that meme to bed. To be honest.
We're going to put the show notes up, and as Rob promised, he's going to very, very nicely stick his a link out to his own entry to the Mars Society. So, do you know where the website is, Rob?
Interplanetary.org.uk.
Yes, indeed. And of course, if you want to be like Rob and join us on the Discord, and I've got a feeling that we should definitely boil up this idea of the Interplanetary Discord, coming up with an entry for the next time one of these Mars Society things comes around. It would be amazing.
It's a lot of work.
It's a lot of work. But I think we've got some great spodcats, though. There's some great spodcats.
Yeah, we have got quite a team, so it could be pretty interesting.
Yeah. That you can find at patreon.com/interplanetary. And next week I'll be thanking people like Rob. Next week in next week's show, which is with Lynn. So we'll see you then. Bye, bye, Spud Cats.
Bye.